Willow Creek was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it belonged on a postcard. Neatly trimmed hedges, pristine sidewalks, matching mailboxes, and a rule book so thick it could knock out a grown man. Every morning, the sprinklers hissed to life in perfect unison, and every evening, porch lights flicked on like clockwork. It was peaceful on the surface, a place where people smiled politely, but rarely lingered in conversation. And that was exactly why John Harper had chosen it. After losing his wife, all he wanted was a quiet, safe space for his daughter Lily. Lily was 12 years old and had never taken a step in her life. A rare neurological condition left her unable to walk, but she never let that stop her. Her wheelchair was her freedom, her window to the world. She loved watching the birds on their fence, counting clouds, and listening to music with her dad on lazy weekends. She had a bright smile that could light up even the gloomiest days, and John lived for that smile. No one in Willow Creek knew that John was the county sheriff. He didn't wear his badge here. To them, he was just the tall, quiet man at the end of Elm Street, always seen pushing his daughter up the custom ramp he'd built. He liked it that way. No drama, no attention, just him and Lily in their little corner of peace. But beneath the calm, something ugly was waiting to be stirred. Karen Mitchell ran the Homeowners Association like a queen with a clipboard. She didn't just enforce the rules, she wielded them like weapons. Her short blonde hair never moved out of place. Her lips were always pursed in disapproval, and her eyes darted like a hawk, scanning for prey. From the moment John and Lily moved in, Karen had them marked. She barely greeted them that first day, her gaze lingering on the wheelchair ramp, like it was graffiti on a church wall. She didn't see Lily's condition. She saw a disruption, an imperfection in her pristine kingdom. The first complaint came just days after they settled in. Karen marched up to John while he was tightening the last bolt on the ramp, her heels clacking against the pavement. "This structure is not HOA approved," she barked, tapping her clipboard with a manicured nail. John looked up, calm but firm. "My daughter needs it to get inside," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Karen scribbled something down without a word and walked off, her nose in the air. But it didn't stop there. A week later, John received a formal notice about visible medical equipment in the garage, Lily's therapy mat and braces. Another fine arrived after Karen noticed the faint marks Lily's wheelchair left on the sidewalk. She even complained about the sound of Lily humming on the porch, calling it a public disturbance. John paid the fines, adjusted what he could, and tried to stay under the radar, but each letter, each confrontation chipped away at his patience. He could handle being misunderstood, but watching Lily's joy dim a little more each day, that was harder. Still, he said nothing. He wasn't just a sheriff anymore. He was a father trying to shield his little girl from a storm she didn't deserve. Karen's bitterness didn't cool. It festered. She started showing up more often, her eyes always fixed on Lily like she was some unwanted weed in an otherwise perfect garden. Every small moment of happiness Lily had seemed to bother Karen. When Lily sat outside on sunny days, humming softly to her favorite songs, Karen would appear on the sidewalk, arms crossed, barking about noise complaints. When neighborhood kids came by to play, gently tossing a ball to Lily or pushing her wheelchair in small circles, Karen's glare was enough to send them scattering back to their houses. The laughter faded from Elm Street, and the silence that replaced it was heavier than before. John watched it all unfold from the porch, fists clenched on the arms of his chair. He knew bullies. He'd dealt with criminals, gang leaders, men twice his size with cold eyes and violent streaks. But this was different. This was slow and insidious, dripping venom one drop at a time into the life he was desperately trying to rebuild for his daughter. And the worst part? Lily noticed. One evening, as the sky turned orange with sunset, she looked up at him, her eyes wide and unsure. "Why does she hate us, Dad?" she asked softly. Her voice carried a hurt far deeper than any bruise. John knelt down in front of her and brushed a lock of hair from her face. "She doesn't hate you, sweetheart," he said, even though part of him wasn't so sure. "Some people just don't understand what makes others special." Lily nodded, but her smile wasn't the same. It was smaller, guarded. Neighbors saw what was happening but said nothing. Mrs. Carter, the elderly widow next door, sometimes left cookies on their porch, silent offerings of solidarity. But even she didn't dare confront Karen directly. The other kids avoided their street when Karen was out. The cheerful energy that once danced around their small home was gone, replaced by tension, quiet, and the unspoken truth that someone in their perfect neighborhood was trying to push them out. And John, for all his strength, was running out of patience. The heat pressed down like a heavy blanket that summer day. The Willow Creek community pool was buzzing with splashes and laughter, sunscreen in the air, children running barefoot across the warm concrete. Lily sat by the pool's edge in her wheelchair, legs covered by a towel, her eyes sparkling with joy as she watched the other kids dive and play. She loved it there. Not because she could swim, but because she could feel part of it, even from the sidelines. John sat a few feet away on a bench, sipping lemonade from a sweating paper cup, his eyes never far from her. He was relaxed, content, lulled by the rhythm of a rare good day. Then Karen Mitchell arrived. She walked in like she owned the place, which in her mind, she did. Her lips were tight, her face flushed, not from heat, but from some inner fury that never quite settled. The second her eyes landed on Lily, her stride quickened. She marched toward them, heels tapping sharply against the concrete. "This isn't a handicap zone," she snapped, her finger jabbing at Lily's chair. "She doesn't belong here, taking up space." John stood, his voice low but firm. "She's not in the way, Karen. There's plenty of room." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules." Before John could say another word, Karen's hands were suddenly gripping the back of Lily's wheelchair. For a split second, there was only confusion, then movement. With a swift, hateful shove, she pushed Lily's chair toward the water. It all happened so fast. The chair hit the edge and tipped. Lily's scream pierced the air as she fell, her body hitting the deep end with a splash. The wheelchair sank instantly, bubbles rising. For a moment, the entire pool area fell silent. Then gasps, cries, someone dropped their drink. John didn't hesitate. He sprinted and dove, slicing into the water like a torpedo. He reached Lily in seconds, her arms flailing, eyes wide with terror. Her body couldn't coordinate to swim, her legs useless, her breaths ragged and panicked. He wrapped his arms around her, pulled her up, and swam hard to the shallow end. She coughed and sobbed against his chest as he carried her out, soaking wet, her small frame trembling. He sat her down on a dry towel, checking her breathing, cradling her close. The rage in his chest burned like a fire. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with a smirk that faded, when John slowly stood and removed his soaked jacket. His badge caught the sun like a blade of justice. "I'm the county sheriff," he said, each word deliberate, cold. Karen's expression crumbled. Her lips parted but no sound came. Around them, neighbors had pulled out their phones. Some were already filming. Others stared in shock, some in fury. Mrs. Carter had her hands to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "She's fine," Karen muttered weakly, trying to wave it off. It was just a scare. John ignored her. He knelt again beside Lily, wrapping her tightly in a dry towel. "You're okay," he whispered, voice softer now. "You're safe. I've got you." She clung to him, still shivering, water dripping from her hair onto his chest. Then he stood again, his badge glinting. The crowd parted. Karen backed up, her face pale now for a different reason. John pulled out his phone and called for backup. "I need deputies at Willow Creek Pool," he said calmly, then clicked the phone off. He turned to Karen and stepped forward, unhooking the cuffs from his belt. "You assaulted my daughter," he said. "You're under arrest." Karen blinked, her body stiff as she stared at the handcuffs dangling from John's hand. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Just a sharp exhale like she'd been punched in the gut. The crowd around the pool remained frozen, every eye fixed on them. Phones stayed up, capturing every second, and the weight of public silence made the air feel like glass. Fragile, ready to shatter. "This is ridiculous," Karen finally snapped, her voice high and shaky. "She's not hurt. You're overreacting." John didn't flinch. His uniform, though soaked, looked more official than ever, his badge gleaming under the sunlight. Water dripped from his sleeves onto the pavement, each droplet a steady beat of restrained fury. "You pushed a disabled child into a pool," he said calmly. "That's assault, and you're lucky it isn't worse." Karen's eyes darted around, searching for a friendly face, but found none. Even the neighbors she used to intimidate stood back, watching in silence. Mrs. Carter held Lily's towel tighter around her, whispering soothing words while Lily sobbed into her chest. The image alone would have broken most people, but not Karen. Not yet. "I didn't mean it," she muttered, backing away a step. "It just happened fast. She was in the way." "You did mean it," John replied, stepping closer. "And now you're going to answer for it." The sirens arrived in the distance, faint but growing louder. 2 deputies rushed in, eyes wide at the scene but offering no questions. They knew better than to ask when John Harper made the call himself. He handed them Karen, guiding her wrists behind her back as he clicked the cuffs into place. Her protests turned to whimpers. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, his voice even, measured, professional. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Karen squirmed but didn't resist. The deputies led her away, and the crowd started to murmur, a ripple of quiet applause breaking through. A few people nodded at John in respect. Some looked at him differently now. Not just the quiet man at the end of Elm Street, but the sheriff who stood up when it mattered. John turned back to Lily, scooped her into his arms, and walked away from the pool without another glance. His boots squished with every step, his heart full of sorrow, fury, and one clear promise. This wasn't over. The story of what happened at the Willow Creek pool spread like wildfire. Within hours, the video of Karen pushing Lily into the water had made its way across neighborhood chats, social media pages, and local news feeds. People who once turned a blind eye to Karen's behavior were now forced to confront what had always been brewing beneath her rule. Malice disguised as order, cruelty masked as regulation. The community, once afraid of her clipboard and threats, found its voice in the wake of what she had done. Karen made bail by the next morning, returning home with her head held artificially high, but she couldn't hide from the whispers. Eyes followed her every step, not with fear anymore, but with outrage. Mailboxes she once judged with her critical eye now stood untouched, their owners no longer shrinking beneath her gaze. She was no longer the queen of the HOA, just a woman drowning in her own disgrace. Within days, the HOA board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The room was packed, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with whispers, their faces tense. Karen sat in the front row, arms crossed, a smug twist on her lips that faltered when John Harper entered the room in full uniform. He wasn't hiding anymore. He stood at the front, placed a thick folder on the podium, and held up a USB drive. Without preamble, he inserted it into the laptop and played the video. Karen's voice echoed through the room. "Maybe this will teach you," followed by the sound of the splash. A collective gasp swept across the crowd. The video ended. Silence followed. Then John raised the stack of complaints and fines Karen had filed. About the ramp, the therapy mat, the humming. One by one he laid them out for all to see. This wasn't an accident, he said. This was targeted harassment. Voices rose from the crowd. Mrs. Carter's quiet but firm. A father in the back recounting how Karen screamed at his kids for biking. Story after story spilled out, years of fear unchained. The board members exchanged nervous glances. "We've voted," one of them finally said, his voice low. "Karen Mitchell is removed from the HOA." The room erupted in applause. Karen sat frozen, her face drained of color. Her power, her grip on Willow Creek, was gone. The trial came swiftly. Public pressure, combined with irrefutable video evidence, meant the court wasted no time. Karen Mitchell walked into the county courthouse no longer flanked by fear or control, but by two deputies. Her once confident posture had wilted, her eyes sunken, her mouth tight as she glanced around the courtroom filled with neighbors, many of whom she'd once ruled with intimidation. Now they watched silently, waiting for justice to speak. John Harper took the stand in full uniform, but this time he wasn't just the sheriff. He was a father. The courtroom listened in stillness as he recounted the months of harassment, how his daughter's medical equipment was called clutter, how humming was treated as noise pollution, how Lily had been isolated, targeted, and finally assaulted. His voice remained steady until he spoke about the pool. "She pushed my daughter into deep water," he said, his jaw tight. "My little girl can't swim. She could have drowned. I was right there, and I still almost didn't get to her in time." He didn't need to raise his voice. The truth was enough. The prosecution played the video again. The same cold shove, the echo of Karen's cruel words, and the chaos that followed. Gasps filled the courtroom all over again. Witnesses testified next. Mrs. Carter, quiet but unshaken, and several other neighbors who spoke about years of mistreatment under Karen's iron rule. Karen's defense tried to argue it had been a moment of frustration, an accident, but the jury didn't believe it. It didn't take them long to return with a verdict. Guilty. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison for felony assault and reckless endangerment, with mandatory fines, some of which would go toward Lily's medical expenses, including checkups and therapy she needed after the trauma. Karen's face crumpled as the sentence was read. Her hands were cuffed again, and she was led out not as a leader, but as a convicted criminal. John didn't watch her leave. He sat beside Lily later that night, her new wheelchair beside the couch, a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was smiling again, drawing with colored pencils, her hands steady. Justice had been served, and in that small, quiet moment, peace began to return. The days after the trial passed slowly, but something in Willow Creek had shifted. The air felt lighter. Without Karen's shadow looming over every lawn and driveway, the neighborhood began to breathe again. Lily's new wheelchair arrived, sleek, comfortable, and easy for her to maneuver. John adjusted it just the way she liked, double-checking every feature before helping her ease into it. He also surprised her with a soft purple blanket, the exact shade she adored, and when she wrapped it around herself, that old smile, the one he hadn't seen in weeks, began to return. John pushed her around the yard that afternoon. The sun was out, the breeze gentle, and Lily's laughter rang out like wind chimes on a spring morning. She pointed at butterflies, asked if they could repaint the porch railings, and tossed a small rubber ball back and forth with her dad. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The tension that had wrapped itself around their little home had finally begun to unravel. The neighbors came back, slowly at first. Mrs. Carter knocked one evening with a tray of warm cookies and a card that simply read, "For my brave girl." Lily grinned, offered her one of the cookies, and hugged her gently. More followed. Kids who once played with her before Karen scared them off showed up again, knocking on the door with a soccer ball, asking if Lily could come outside. John wheeled her out to the sidewalk, and soon she was in the middle of a gentle game of catch, her giggles blending with the shouts of the other children. The biggest surprise came a week later when a few kids showed up with cans of paint, bright red, yellow, blue, and began decorating Lily's ramp. They asked John if it was okay. He just smiled and stepped back. The plain grey ramp transformed into a colourful mural of shapes, stars, and messy handprints. Lily clapped and watched every stroke. "It's pretty," she whispered. And it was. It wasn't just paint. It was a symbol of resilience, of belonging, of change. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was healing. And for the first time in a long time, John believed they might be okay. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across Elm Street. John sat on the porch beside Lily, her new blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her freshly painted ramp gleaming with colour just a few feet away. The air was quiet, warm, and filled with the kind of peace that only comes after a storm has finally passed. Lily leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his arm, watching the last colours of the day bleed into the sky. For a while they said nothing. They didn't need to. The world had been loud for too long. Now, silence felt like a gift. Then, in a voice so soft it almost floated away with the breeze, Lily spoke. "You're my hero, Dad." John's throat tightened. He looked down at her, and her eyes were shining. Not from tears, but from something stronger, something healing. He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "You're mine too, baby girl." They stayed that way, wrapped in each other, as twilight settled in around them. In the weeks that followed, life didn't become perfect, but it became livable again. The porch became their favorite place. Some days they sat with lemonade, other days with coloring books or just quiet thoughts. People waved as they passed. Some stopped to chat. The fear was gone. What remained was love. A quiet house at the end of Elm Street, where a father protected his daughter not with guns or sirens, but with courage, patience, and heart. Karen was gone, but what she tried to destroy had only grown stronger. And as the stars blinked to life above them, Lily smiled, her fingers laced through her father's, and for the first time in a long time, she knew everything was going to be okay.